There is a 4-second wide shot in the second episode of Game of Thrones Season 1. Ned Stark arrives in King's Landing with his daughters. The camera pulls back. You see the Red Keep, the city sprawling underneath it, dust from real carts and real streets. Light somewhere between morning and noon, 4 seconds. We're going to spend the next few minutes on those 4 seconds. I know how that sounds. I have watched that shot dozens of times. Not for the writing, not for the performance, just for the wide. Because in 2011, on a budget that today wouldn't cover the catering of a Marvel show, 4 seconds of a small camera move did something modern prestige TV with 10 times the money cannot do. It made me believe King's Landing was a city, not a set. A city, a real place with stories happening in alleys I was never going to visit, in taverns the camera was never going to enter, in corners of a continent I'd have to imagine on my own. That's what good fantasy used to be. Last year I watched the King's Landing scene in House of the Dragon and I felt nothing like that. Same city, same kingdom, a budget that dwarfs what HBO had in 2011. Better visual effects, sharper digital tools, more finished sets. I know you have felt it too. You probably haven't had the language for it because nobody's written it down yet, but you felt it. The new Game of Thrones shows look bland, colorless. They make a continent-sized fantasy feel weirdly small. And the strange thing, the part that actually made me want to make this video, is that this isn't an issue with just Game of Thrones. It's the latest Hollywood disease. This is Ish versus Hollywood. And today we're going to attempt to understand why Hollywood has started looking worse than ever. The word I keep coming back to is texture. And I know that's a film school word. Bear with me for 1 minute. Old Game of Thrones had texture. The clothes looked like they'd been worn before the scene started, by people, in mud, probably for several seasons. Walls had stains, floors had straw, and the straw was actually under actors' feet, not added in post by some VFX artist named Brent, who's also working on 3 other shows at the same time. When somebody walked outside in winter, you could see their breath, because they were genuinely outside, in Iceland, in Northern Ireland, where the cold was a problem the production had to deal with on a daily basis. Texture is a thing that tells your brain a place is real. You don't consciously notice it. It works at a level your eye processes before your brain catches up. A scene with texture feels like something that happened. A scene without it feels like something that was assembled by a committee in a Slack channel. Modern prestige TV, and this includes shows I love, shows people are calling masterpieces, shows I genuinely think are excellent, has been quietly losing its texture for about 6 years. Watch a courtyard scene in House of the Dragon. The cobblestones looked like cobblestones. The costumes look like costumes. The fire from a torch falls on the actor's face in a way that is technically perfect and feels nothing like the way real firelight falls on a real face. Everything is in focus. Everything has been color graded to a slightly desaturated tone the colorist was paid to apply. Because in 2026, that is what prestige is supposed to look like. Pull a frame from House of the Dragon. Pull a frame from high-end Marvel show. Pull a frame from any other premium streaming drama. Strip the costumes and the actors out. Try to tell them apart now. You cannot. They're graded the same, lit the same, run through the same digital intermediate, the same LUTs, the same color science, and in many cases by the same humans. Westeros doesn't have its own light anymore. It has the same light as everything else. And the how is industrial. Let's go there. To understand why everything looks the same, you have to understand that almost everything is now made the same way, which is the most boring possible explanation for why your favorite show feels off, but I'm afraid it's the truth. About a decade ago, 2 things happened at the same time and broke prestige TV from the inside. The first was the rise of the LED volume. The volume is the giant, curved screen wall they put behind actors instead of taking them on location. You know it from The Mandalorian, where the baby Yoda is technically standing in front of a TV the size of Costco. The volume is now standard equipment on essentially every mid to high budget streaming show. It got sold to us as a creative win, and sometimes it is one. It's also the reason every show now has the same slightly too soft background and the same uncanny lighting fall off, because they're all being shot in front of the same wall. The second thing was the consolidation of post-production. The same small handful of finishing houses now do almost every premium show. The colorist who graded one prestige fantasy this year almost certainly graded another one last year. They use refined versions of the same LUTs. They reach for the same filmic looks. Their taste, and they have taste, they're good at their jobs, gets applied to nearly every frame of nearly every premium show. The result is that Prestige now has a single visual identity. Which is to say, Prestige doesn't have a visual identity, it has a brand color. I want to be careful here, because I'm not pitching a villain story. The volume is sometimes a creative win. The colorist consolidation is sometimes good. None of these tools is, by itself. The problem is that nobody is ever required to fight them. They are the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance, walked by 100 different productions, becomes a road. The road goes one place. Layer on top of that, the streaming mandate, which is the ugliest part of this conversation, but the part that explains the most. Every major streamer has internal guidelines about how their shows should look on a phone, because the dominant device people watch streaming content on is, depending on the study you read, somewhere between a phone and a small laptop. I want you to sit with that sentence. The dominant device for watching prestige drama in 2026 is a phone the size of a salt line cracker in a sunlit kitchen while someone is making toast, which means the dynamic range of every frame gets compressed at a production stage so that nothing is too dark to read on a salt line in direct sunlight, which means the deep blacks that gave old Game of Thrones and prestige cinema generally its weight are quietly being lifted out of the negative before the show ever reaches you. You've probably noticed that nothing on streaming feels as dark as it used to be. There's a reason. The darkness has been graded out for toast. This is the part that ties back to Westeros specifically. There is a particular kind of failure that happens when you take a story whose entire point is scale and process the texture out of it. Because scale doesn't come from money, scale comes from your eye, believing the world keeps going past the frame. Game of Thrones as a piece of fiction only works if you believe the world is bigger than the camera. Westeros has to feel like a continent. King's Landing has to feel like a city, 500,000 people, most of whom you are never going to meet. The wall has to feel like a border between something and something. Journeys have to feel like journeys. The moment you replace location work with virtual extension, real backgrounds with rendered backdrops, and finish the whole thing in a flat digital intermediate, the world stops feeling bigger than the camera. It starts feeling exactly as big as whatever's in the shot, which, when your shot is two people in a corridor talking about dragons, is a corridor. Watch the season 1 finale of the original. The fire, the dragons, Daenerys. That sequence works partly because it's emotionally enormous. But at the level of craft, it works because everything in the frame, including the dirt and the air, is real. You believe it could continue past the edge of the shot. The thing happening inside is happening somewhere. Now think about the equivalent moments in House of the Dragon. The big set pieces, the dragon, the political confrontations. They're shot well, acted well, often very well written. They do not, at the level of craft, convince you that anything exists outside the frame. The frame is the world. The world ends where the lens stops. This is the part of the problem that almost never gets explained properly in critic reviews. You can spend more money than ever before and produce a show that feels smaller than the show that came before it on a tenth of the budget. Because money doesn't buy texture. Money in the current pipeline often actively removes it. The shows with bigger budgets are more likely to use the volume, more likely to extend sets digitally, more likely to finish in the same houses everyone else uses, more likely to follow streaming mastering rules, more likely to get fed through the same homogenizing machine. The richer prestige TV gets, the smaller it tends to look, which sounds like a problem that is limited to Game of Thrones, which it really isn't. Once you start seeing this, you cannot unsee it. So I'm going to ruin a few shows for you. I'm sorry in advance. Rings of Power, on a budget that may be most ever spent on a single season of television, looks like it was filmed inside a computer. I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as a description. Almost every wide shot reads as a render. Almost every costume reads as a costume that was just sewn last Tuesday. The landscapes look like what they are. Matte paintings extended off real locations by people who do that for a living. Marvel's streaming output since around 2021 has been notorious inside the industry of being rushed through finishing houses with VFX timelines that should be illegal. The result is a body of work where almost every show looks like it was lit in the same room, probably because somewhere it kind of was. Stranger Things has visibly flattened over its run. Season 1 looks like a movie, whereas Season 4 looks like a series of very brightly lit sound stages with very expensive boys on them. The Witcher, after Season 1, has the same problem. Foundation has the same problem. So does frankly whichever Star Wars thing isn't Andor. Andor is the example I want to spend a beat on because it's the proof that this isn't inevitable. Andor, by every account that's been published, interviews, behind the scenes documentation, comments from Tony Gilroy himself, fought the pipeline on purpose. Real locations whenever possible, standalone sets, lit with intent, active pushback against the studio's preferred volume-heavy production model. The result is Star Wars show that is, by some distance, the best looking thing in that franchise's modern history. It has texture because the people making it picked a fight to keep it. Better Call Saul kept its texture because Vince Gilligan kept shooting in New Mexico on real streets with practical light. It looks like a place because it was filmed in a place. There is a deep secret to good cinematography that, I'm sorry to be one to break it to you, it's filming things in places. Shogun, last year's most praised drama, kept its texture by committing to scale practical sets and obsessive period detail, which is also why it felt like the only epic show in years that landed as actually epic. The pattern across the counterexamples is brutally consistent. The shows that feel real are the shows where somebody in charge fought the pipeline. The shows that don't are the shows where nobody fought. Because fighting costs money, time, and political capital that most productions are no longer willing to spend. This is a craft crisis Hollywood is not yet willing to name, possibly because naming it would mean admitting it's been on purpose. So here's where I land. The thing fans of Game of Thrones are moaning when they say the new shows feel bland, it isn't the writing. The writing of House of the Dragon is, on most metrics, fine. People are not actually reacting to bad writing. They're reacting to something else. They just don't have the words for it yet. The thing they're moaning is that the world used to feel like it could exist outside the frame, and now everything they see ends at the edge of the camera. That's a small technical change. A few minutes of color grading per scene, a few decisions to use a volume instead of a real exterior, a few notes from a streaming executive about phone readability. Each of those choices on its own is small. Together they've done something enormous. They've taken away the medium's ability to suggest a world. And the worst part, the part that turns this from a complaint into a video, is that none of it is fixable inside the show. House of the Dragon as a production cannot grade its way out of this. The showrunners can't single-handedly de-homogenize their look without the studio above them deciding to spend money on bespoke finishing, real locations, longer post timelines, and mastering for an environment most viewers will never even use. That decision lives at the studio level. It does not live with people who actually make the show. Until that changes, and there is no sign that it will, because the economics of the pipeline are exactly what made the pipeline attractive in the first place. Every new prestige fantasy series is going to have the same problem. I'm looking at you, Harry Potter. The dragons will look fine. The actors will be very talented. The dialogue will be written with care. And the world is going to feel a little smaller than the world that came before it. And that's not an issue with Westeros. That's a problem with Hollywood in general. It's a problem the audience can feel even when they can't name it. And eventually, when enough audiences feel something they can't name, they stop showing up. Not all at once, slowly, over a couple of years. I think we're in those couple of years right now. This is Ish vs. Hollywood, and I wish you some colors in your life.